So here in Silicon Valley, I think some of the things that we see with our children and some of the things that we hopefully want to help them work on and improve on their own, issues like fear of failure, even though they're incredibly bright, capable young children, fear of letting their parents down, defining success in very narrow ways, peer pressure, conforming to the group, always being on. How can we impart some perspectives both on the parents and the children to manage these issues and create more balance in their lives? One of the things you were remarking on is I think you noticed that particularly in Palo Alto, which is an incredibly sophisticated city, the suicide rate is very, very high.
Of all the terrible things that can happen to us, our children want to commit suicide. This is unacceptable. It's the worst thing that can happen in any society. But this is not just an American phenomenon, it's happening everywhere. In India, 9,600 children committed suicide last year below 18 years of age. Out of this, about 800 children are below 12 years of age. Our children want to commit suicide. There can't be anything worse happening in society, isn't it? Obviously, we're doing something fundamentally wrong because a child is a fresh life. A child is a manifestation of exuberance of life. But today you're seeing children are becoming like this. Because the fundamental reason for this is one thing you will see in our schools. Children are exuberant and joyful. This is most important for me. This is important for every human being, not just for children. We have become like this because we are exercising only one dimension of our intelligence, which is called the intellect. Intellect means your intellect is useful only if it is sharp. You agree with me? Hello? You are becoming so serious. I'm talking about exuberance. Your intellect is useful to you only if it's sharp. The nature of the intellect is such, anything you give your intellect, whatever you give to your intellect, the only way it can know something is by dissecting it. If you give this flower to a scientist, first thing he will do is he will pull it apart to see what is inside. If I want to know you, Jonathan, should I pull you apart? Is there a way to know life, I'm asking? Because this is what the intellect can do. We're just banking on human intellect too much, we're too enamored by our own intellect. Intellect means it has to function logically. Once you're intellectually on, you cannot accept anything which is not logical, yes? Logic means there has to be two. Two were created by your intellect. What is one big life? We make it into two. Everything we go on dividing and we fragment the universe into millions of pieces in our mind. And we store all these pieces and hope they will all fall together. They will never fall together because whatever falls, falls in the sharpness of your intellect and further slices. You're talking about being really smart. If you're really smart, you must know how to keep yourself well, isn't it? Hello? I'm really smart but I'm screwed up, what is the point, I'm saying? What is the point of this? If I'm really smart, I must know how to keep myself in my best possible way. This has not happened because our education systems, in their fundamental concept, do not allow other dimensions of intelligence to function. We recognize in the yogic sciences, when we say human mind, In yoga, we say there are 16 parts to your mind. These 16 parts can be categorized as fundamentally 4 parts. First is the intellect, which is called as the buddhi in the local languages. The next is called ahankara, the identity. Your intellect always functions around your identity. Whatever you identified with, your intellect functions around that. It may be your individuality, it may be your family, it may be your community, it may be your race, religion, nationality, but it functions around that. You will live for it and you'll die for it. Whatever you identify with, that is what it will try to protect, because intellect is essentially a survival tool. Without intellect, you cannot survive. Right now, we are using intellect as a way of acquiring knowledge. We are using intellect to enhance our life. It will not work like that. Intellect is a fantastic survival tool. If your intellect is sharp, you'll survive well. But survival will never satisfy a human being. And for these children who are in this kind of school, survival is not even an issue. So they don't know what the hell they're doing with themselves. Raising the bar of survival, that's all that's happening. We are going on raising the bar of survival. Though you're doing very well, your stomach is full, you're eating and sleeping well, you feel like you're being oppressed because you have raised the bar of survival to an unrealistic place. Survival is taken care of, isn't it? Hello? So you should never feel threatened about that. It's only about doing something more, but that will not come through intellect, because intellect will only think of survival, because it is a survival tool. Now we are trying to put the world together with our intellect. This is like… intellect is like a knife. You are using a knife to stitch. You know, you will tear more and more. You will see the more intellectual people get, they look smarter in a society, but if you just look at them as a life, they're just stupid. They don't know simplest things of their life. They're smart compared to somebody else, because they're able to do something that somebody cannot do. But how they are within themselves, they can't sit in one place peacefully. This means you obviously don't know how to handle your intelligence. The only problem with most human beings is, people do not know how to handle their own intelligence. Well, they have exotic names for this. They call it stress, they call it anxiety, they call it depression and many varieties of depression and madness and whatever. But fundamentally, you don't know how to handle your own intelligence. If you do not know how to handle the most vital aspect of who you are, which is your intelligence, which sets you apart from every other creature on this planet, it's a disastrous life. How can this be a smart life, I'm asking? If you are smart, you know how to handle your vital assets. One of the greatest assets that we have as human beings is, we have a cerebral capability that no other creature has. But we have not taken charge of it. It works against us. This is because you have a car with 4 wheels, but you want to drive it on 1 wheel. It's very stressful. It's bound to be stressful. The other dimensions are not used. The second is called ahankara, which is the identity. This is very important, how an identity is set up. I see in these cultures very strong identities about religion, about race, about nationality, and maybe a football club or a basketball club. They are so strongly identified. This will not allow things to happen. One thing traditionally in India we set up is, which is unfortunately vanishing today because we have taken to English education. Traditionally, when a child has to start education, first alphabet he has to learn means, first he is told, your identification is with the entire cosmos. Aham Brahmasmi, he's taught. He's made to utter a mantra which means, I'm everything. Because education is seen as an empowerment. You should not empower a human being who has limited identifications. If you empower somebody with limited identity, he will cause damage to everybody else who are not in the ambit of that identity. This is what as nations we are doing. This is what as race and religion we are doing to each other, isn't it? Every day this is happening. When somebody else does it, it looks ugly. When we do it, we are justified because everybody has their own logic. Let me take an extreme example because I have a way of walking into trouble. Right now, one thing that bothers everybody is what is happening in the Middle East, this ISIS, whatever, okay? Most horrendous things are happening. But people who are perpetrating this believe they are doing the best thing. They're doing God's work. And they believe it 100%. They are not crooked people, believe me. They believe it 100%. Because a man who is willing to die for it, at least you must trust this, isn't it? Someone is willing to die for something means he must be genuine in what he carries within himself, isn't it? Yes or no? Life is precious for every human being. He is willing to die for it means he absolutely believes it. The only problem is limited identity. You have an identity of yours, others are not in that, so they must go. So like this, from a very early age, we are setting up identities which are narrow, based on various things. This is a very important requirement if intelligence has to simply expand without limits. It is very, very important children start with a limitless identity, that you're identified with everything in the universe. This is very important. Now this identity, if you want to use an analogy, your intellect is like a knife. The identity is the hand that holds it. The hand that holds decides whether a knife will make life or take life, isn't it? Knife does not decide. In the hands of a surgeon, it may save a life. In an irresponsible hand, it takes a life. Knife is not doing this. It is the hand that holds what kind of identity have you taken on. Accordingly, your intellect becomes a fruitful thing for everybody around you, or it becomes a destructive process. Intellect is a useless instrument unless it's fed with some data. If there is no data, if you wipe out all your memory, suddenly you look like a dumb person, though you have a sharp intellect. Because intellect cannot function without data. So the third dimension of the mind is called as manas, which is a huge silo of memory. We identify 8 different forms of memory. The first form of memory is called as elemental memory, atomic memory, evolutionary memory, karmic memory. In that there are 2 varieties. One is a silo of memory, another is an active memory, which is called as sanchita and prarabdha. And sensory memory, inarticulate memory and articulate memory. What you're experiencing as conscious memory is the articulate memory. It is not even 1% of the memory that you carry. When I say not even 1% of the memory that you carry, you definitely do not remember how 10 generations ago your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather looked like, but his nose is sitting on your face. Because your body remembers every bit of it. Yes or no? There is a genetic memory here which remembers. Similarly, there's an evolutionary memory, atomic memory, everything. Everything from the beginning of creation to now, in some way is there. That is why this body is able to take this form and retain this form. Essentially, every form and every particular specific activity what we're calling as genetics, what is passing on from one generation to another generation is just a certain module of memory, isn't it? Memory is a possibility and it is also a boundary. Memory means accumulated information. Today, in the technology world, memory does not mean here, it's in the computer, in so many places. Memory means accumulated information. Accumulated information means a limited possibility. So the 4th dimension of intelligence is referred to as chitta. This is a dimension of intelligence unsullied by memory. There is not an iota of memory in this. This is the intelligence which is the basis of your making. That is, today, if you eat an apple, there is an intelligence here which turns an apple into a human being. If you eat a fish into this, it will turn into a human being, because there is an intelligence here which can do this miraculous job. If a drop of this intelligence, if you touch your chitta, suddenly your experience of life will become an ever-expanding process. Suddenly, your genius will flower in such a way. Every human being might have touched this dimension of intelligence at some point or other unconsciously. But the important thing is you're consciously able to bring forth. This must come into our children. If we are interested that the next generation should be way better than who we are, it's important that they touch a dimension of intelligence that we did not access. Otherwise, in many ways, we have not done what we are supposed to do, because one of the fundamental purposes why we are here is the next generation should be able to do what we could not do. They must be able to do what we did not even dare to imagine. Not in terms of doing freaky things, but in terms of doing something well beyond our capacity to do things, isn't it? That can only happen if we touch this dimension of intelligence, otherwise intellect is a trap. Intellect is good for survival because it only goes from the accumulated memory, beyond that it cannot expand. Here and there, every human being might have touched this dimension of intelligence, but are we creating a system through which we can constantly access this? That's a big question. Only then human genius will flower. Only then you will see education becomes an empowerment, not an enslavement to some kind of desire